You are listening right here to KHTS, your hometown station. And my name is Sharon Brubaker, Advanced Certified Grief Recovery Specialist, and you are listening to the Grief Recovery Hour. I am so honored to have you here. The most exciting part of my show is that we are Facebook Live. I love that. So if you'd like to follow along with the show, that'd be great. Feel free to put in any questions you may have. Everything will be completely confidential. We'll try to answer those live on the show as we go along. If we can't get to them prior to the show ending, I will go back and answer all of the questions. If you are listening to this program, there's a huge probability that your heart may be broken. It could be from a grief, either recent or long ago, or it could be from the breakup of a romantic relationship. It could be from one of the 43 known losses that we know can cause a grieving experience. Regardless of the cause of your broken heart, we are not going to tell you how you feel because you already know. At best, I'm here to tell you, friend, that I know what it felt like when my broken heart occurred, and it was not good. Welcome to our show. I have an amazing guest. Hey, guys, you are listening to the Sharon Show today. Please allow me to introduce to you Sharon Ellers.
Yes.
Yes, she had to give me the correct pronunciation. She is also an advanced grief recovery specialist, my sister in grief, and we're going to be talking my favorite subject today, and she is a Reiki master teacher.
Yes, I am.
How exciting is that?
Thank you.
Welcome to our show today. I'm
Thank
so
you for
glad you
having
came.
me. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Sharon, tell us a little bit just about how you got into grief recovery.
Grief recovery came to me purely by accident. It's one of those things I think most grief recovery specialists say. It just happened one day. I had lost my best friend to suicide. And as I was going through my healing after I lost her, I decided that I was going to fix myself. I didn't need any help, and that wasn't going very well. And then I lost my former fiance to suicide. So within a 2-year period, I had lost 2 people to suicide, and I realized, okay, now I need help. So I started Googling grief, and the first thing that came up was grief recovery, and I thought, grief recovery, the grief recovery method, what the heck is this? And it's been around for 30 years. I'm like, it's been around for 30 years? I've never even known about it. But of course, I hadn't been to that level of grieving before. And so I just, on a fluke, just signed up for one of their, I signed up for the certification workshop, which surprised me. I didn't even go to a support group. I just jumped right in. And so that's kind of how I found it, purely by accident, and it transformed my life.
And how was it when you finished the class? Was it that you knew this was for you? Your life changed? What did it feel like?
You know, going into it, I didn't know what to expect, but I took the 4-day, it was a 4-day certification. So it's heavy, intensive work. And we were there from 8 o'clock in the morning until like 10 o'clock at night. And then we had homework we had to do. So we were up till 1 o'clock in the morning doing that. And I think from the very beginning, I felt myself change. I felt like this weight that I'd been carrying around for these years after my friends died was just starting to lift from my shoulders. I mean, it wasn't easy work, believe me. It was very intense. It was very difficult. It was very draining at the time. But I remember just feeling energized as a result of it. It just really made my life feel completely different. And I was so excited when I was done. It was like, okay, how do I share this? How do I share this? How do I share this with other people?
Absolutely. I often tell grievers that it sort of feels like if you came to my office every day and I put a potato in your bag, in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that bag is going to be so heavy.
Right.
But going through grief recovery is the exact opposite, right? So it's like you come in every day and I remove a potato, which is the grief and the pain that's just stuck in your heart. And so that's kind of what you're describing, is that you just started to feel lighter. Mm-hmm. You started to feel easier. What do you think was the most profound thing that you learned there about grief? What was the one thing that you didn't know that really stood out to you?
I think the most important things for me was the misinformation. Yeah. That was huge, because after my friend died, I went into mode of figuring out what stage I was in. I went to be strong. I started working extra hours because everyone says, be busy, stay busy, and I did all the things that I learned were not the right things to do. And so learning that, I realized, oops, not wasted, but I took 2 years of my life following down a path that didn't work, and it didn't work at all. It made me feel worse, actually.
Yeah. And so it's sort of like you're numb. You're numb. You're just pushing through. You're going through the process. For me, I'll tell you that I think that the biggest thing that stood out for me was learning that there weren't 5 stages. That was the first thing that was like an aha moment for me, right? And so because we kept trying to make these stages fit. So you were doing the research, you were finding out about the stages, and then you're like, okay, what stage am I in? And what process do they go on? It really hurts my heart when I hear people still mention the stages. How about for you?
Yes, it does. And I think as an engineer, my background is cybersecurity engineering. I'm very analytical. And so my head was like, well, there's got to be something you need to follow. And that's kind of what we've been brainwashed, unfortunately, that these stages are applicable to everybody. In reality, it's really only applicable to people who have a terminal illness and are facing their own death. But that's what I heard. And so I pulled out my process and I started looking at my milestones. And, I'm thinking, well, am I angry? No, I don't feel angry. Well, I must be doing this wrong, So I think from an analytical perspective, people tend to gravitate to something because they think that it's going to fix them.
Right.
And I realized after taking the grief recovery courses that no, these things don't work, that there are no stages, that it's all, kind of in a mess, and that you go with what is best for you, which I never would have thought of on my own.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's amazing. One of the things that I know a lot of clients will ask me, and you and I talked about this yesterday, Sharon has a beautiful show on her Facebook page, which I'm going to share with everyone in the notes down below our Facebook Live, but she interviewed me yesterday and we talked about when a lot of clients come in and they say, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? What's your answer to them and how do you help them through that? Am I doing this right?
I think the important thing to understand is that grief is individual and unique, like snowflakes or fingerprints, and that everybody grieves in the way that's right for them. Yeah. And if I had only known that after Joy died, I think my experience would have been completely different. But because I didn't know it, I went down a path that wasn't healthy for me. I think it's important to know that it's up and down. It's all over the place. It's a parallel universe. You are numb. And everybody is different. And I use the example that, my dad died a year ago. My sister and I are very different, but we also had very different relationships with my dad. And so my grieving experience, I was able to complete the relationship with him prior to his death. So my grieving was very different than it was when Joy died. My sister grieves very differently, and that's totally expected and totally normal. And I think we're so hung up on what we should be doing that's quote unquote right, we forget that we're all individual and unique, and what we do is right for us.
Absolutely. Perfect. That's perfect. Hearing you say that, even saying that answer, makes me think, wow, if we all had this tool from the very first moment, and you experienced Joy so much different than you experienced your dad. For me, I experienced Austin and then my dad, but I had grief recovery for that. And then Donovan died, which is Austin's brother. And all 3 of them were still different, but I had tools then, which made it so much more of a different journey, deeper journey, I think. And beautiful in a way. Even going through it, like it had this own part that I was like, okay, I got this. I can figure this out. I know what I'm doing. So one of the things I said when I introduced you is that you are a Reiki master teacher.
Yes.
Tell me what that is. And I want you to really go simple so whoever doesn't know, they will understand.
Yeah, I definitely will do that. And I just want to share that Reiki is a Japanese healing technique for relaxation and stress reduction. And I found Reiki when I was working in Washington, D.C. for a presidential appointee. He was very stressful. And I was trying to find ways to decompress from my job. And so I happened to see a business card in a coffee shop, and it said relax on it. It didn't even say Reiki. It said relax. And I thought, okay, well, that's what I need. And so I went in, and had no expectations at all. And when I laid down, it was kind of like, it's very similar to massage, but you've got your clothes on. And it's just very light touch. And really what the practitioner does is, I don't want to sound too woo-woo because I am an engineer, so I can go into quantum physics and how we're all made up with energy and stuff. But what the practitioner does is when things are difficult, we get energy blockages in our body, and that can manifest in negative emotions. It can also manifest in physical disease. And I found that my stress-related job in Washington was starting to affect me physically. And I found in taking Reiki that I just was able to relax. And so over the years, there's 3 levels in Reiki, and the first level you learn how to heal yourself, and the second level you learn how to heal others, and the third level is how to teach people, basically. And I thought, well, I'll just take the first level so I can work on myself. But over time, I just kept taking the classes till I ended up becoming a master teacher, not thinking that I would actually teach anybody with it. So in a nutshell, Reiki is really a technique of energy healing that's been around for thousands of years in different places. The Japanese are the ones who actually brought it to the U.S. in the early 1900s, and it's been, kind of taught. It's an international. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Reiki practitioners all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, and again, the Japanese, it was really for finding a way of life that was peaceful and calm, and giving yourself tools again to be able to, decompress from life and become, one with the universe, whatever you want to call it. But it's really a spiritual tool is what it is.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. So we're going to talk about how you join those together. But prior to how you joined grief and Reiki together, which I think is amazing, it was the tool that you had when Joy passed away. And so you tried using the Reiki solely by itself. What was the benefit of that? Did it work out, or were you getting some relief? Tell me about that experience.
Well, I think the Reiki helped me in a lot of ways from a physical perspective.
Yeah.
It allowed me to relax in the sense that I slept maybe for 4 hours instead of for 2.
Oh, wow.
It kept me healthy, which is something I realized after I had gone through all of my losses, that the Reiki really kept me healthy, which for grievers is very not normal, because when you're grieving, grief is such an energy depleting emotion that if you're not taking care of yourself, you can get sick, and it's very normal to do that. So I was working on the physical side, but I didn't think that I was really healing emotionally. And I think that's where the grief recovery work came in, is that it sort of blended together and brought the emotions forward, because I wasn't facing my emotions. Even though Reiki helps with that, I wasn't using it in the way to allow my emotional, my heart to really burst open and get all the emotions that needed to be out.
Absolutely. And that brings us to that healing from grief really happens in the heart. It really starts in the heart. And what happens a lot of times is people try to fix their head, and they go after what they think is logically right to fix all the things in their head, and it's really in the heart. So you were able to bring this energy and the grief together. So that was your idea. So after you did grief recovery, you're like, ta-da! These two work perfectly together. I'm going to join them. And so how do you use that in your practice today?
Well, I think what I realized was, in order to heal from grief, you have to be able to heal emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And I think the spiritual aspects and the physical healing aspects of Reiki combined with the grief work really kind of gives you, plus other tools that are out there, really gives you an opportunity to look at grief holistically, which we don't tend to do. We tend, like you said, to think through it.
Right.
Or we tend to only focus on the emotions, which isn't a bad thing, but I felt for me, because I tend to not sleep well, I tend to not, even though I was dealing with my emotions, it was still affecting me physically. I was starting to have chest pains after John died. I thought I was literally going to have a heart attack. And I think I realized that I was allowing my grief to affect me in ways that I didn't understand until I had been through it. And so the grief Reiki idea was to bring those components together and make it more of a holistic approach to addressing grief, not just one or the other, but all of it, because I think you have to talk about the emotions. You have to talk about the physical and take care of that. You have to eat healthy. You have to walk. You have to do whatever it is. And you have to address your spiritual, the spiritual impacts of grief on you. And I realized that, the signs and messages and, not the religious part of it, but the spiritual side of it, was so important, and you couldn't push that aside. So trying to look at it holistically, I think, was what worked for me.
I think that is amazing. Wow, that's beautiful. You really filled my heart. So I noticed that you do a lot of programs. So you will not only do your grief recovery programs, but quite often you'll do a walk on the beach. You'll do Kids Day, Parents Day, different theme days. Tell me a little bit about those.
I think that when you're grieving, you want to be able to tell your story, and there isn't one specific way that you can do that. And so this year I kind of changed my whole pattern of how I was doing my grief support groups. And what I found was that for some people, they're more comfortable talking in a certain environment. For other people, and I was one of these people, that being outside and walking for me was very healing. Again, energetically, it brings the energy back into your body that you're losing when you're grieving. And so I just thought, I love to walk. I used to walk all the time. And I thought, well, why don't I just start grief walking? And so whoever shows up, I had 1 week where it was all women who had lost husbands. Wow. And so they were able to have this conversation while we were walking. We're outside by the beach. We can see other people going by, but we're also able to, share our feelings and stories with each other in a very healthy environment. And so I think I've just learned that changing it up attracts different people, and it attracts what they need for their own healing journey. And so I'm trying not to be status quo, I guess, at this point. And so different things have worked different ways, and there's always different groups of people that show up. So it's just interesting to me how that happens.
I think that is so cool. That's so amazing. So are these always clients from your class, from your grief recovery training, or is it just that they see it and they're like, I need to talk?
It's been interesting. Sometimes it's been long-term clients that come back. Sometimes, I advertise in a variety of different formats like you do. Sometimes it's just random people I've never met before who show up. I've stopped trying to think too much about it and just allow it to happen. And I think I've been very blessed and lucky that it happens the way it's supposed to. And the topics bring in the people. If we talk about pet loss, for example, then we end up with people who, want to talk about losing a pet. If we had 1 week where we talked just about fathers. So, it just depends. And it's been very structured in a unstructured sort of way.
It's so amazing, because we know for a fact that you and I, that grievers need to talk.
Absolutely.
And they need to be listened to and heard with respect. And so you're really giving them the chance to come there and really share. It's almost like just blowing off that steam. I just need to tell this story to somebody. I can imagine that being in the group and even with strangers, because you're so dying to tell your story and have somebody hear you and with respect and really hear the words that you're saying, that is absolutely amazing. Do you open with a question? How do you set up the group? Or do you let it happen organically?
Well, once a month I have a grief circle, and that's really what we talk about being our sort of grief free form or grief freestyle. It's more of a freestyle thing. One of the clients, one of the group members calls it our freestyle, where we just talk about whatever comes up. Maybe it's a particular topic. Maybe it's just everybody has something they want to share about what's going on. In the other weeks, we often pick a topic. How do you heal your broken heart? Or, tools that you can use to help you, feel better physically. Or one week we talked about signs and messages, and we actually had something fall off the bookshelf while we were talking about the signs and messages that all the grief support group people were receiving. And so we felt, okay, well, somebody was listening to us. So it kind of just, I don't know, I kind of go with the flow. I found when I was less structured that it went better.
Groups were always my favorite. Something happens when you're in the group that the energy there, the energy that the group brings together, and the fact that you're holding the space for the other person and you're not literally there for yourself, but you're getting something out of it and you're giving back, the energy is amazing. Don't you find that? It's
Absolutely.
totally amazing.
It's so healing and just so peaceful, and I think everybody gets out of it what they need to for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, everyone, that was our first segment. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to segue into suicide and what's been going on around the world and just talking through having a safe place to talk. We'll see you right back here after the break.
Boots and Brews Country Music Festival is coming back to Santa Clarita June 16th.
I'm ready for this.
Starring country superstar Randy Houser.
Show you how country feels.
Jared Neiman. Eric Pasley.
Young forever.
Lindsay L. and Tyler Rich.
It's awesome.
Space is limited. Purchase tickets now at bootsandbrews.com. That's bootsandbrews.com. Boots and Brews is sponsored by the City of Santa Clarita, Miller Coors, The Bloody Cure, The Pleasure Pantry, and is a California Beer Festival production.
We're venturing onto an uncharted island. The Church on the Way Santa Clarita invites you to join them July 16th through the 20th for Shipwrecked, where kids will learn what it means to be anchored in the truth that Jesus carries them through life's storms. This dynamic week of Vacation Bible School is packed with games, group activities, and interactive lessons. Summer is coming. Don't miss out. For more information about the Church on the Way Santa Clarita, including service times and what's happening throughout the summer, visit tcotwsc.org.
What's the perfect way to end the weekend? Sunday brunch at Salt Creek Grill, of course. Wind down with delectable dishes off Salt Creek's award-winning menu and enjoy a glass of champagne, because after all, you deserve it. Make Sunday brunch at Salt Creek Grill a new tradition with your family and friends. Salt Creek Grill in Valencia on Town Center Drive in front of the movie theater. For reservations, 222-9999 or go online to saltcreekgrill.com.
At Advanced Audiology, we know how important hearing is to you, your loved ones, your work success, your safety, and your ability to stay in the game. Most people won't admit hearing loss to themselves or others. We make it easy for you. Today's digital hearing aids come in a variety of styles, including invisible. All feature-rich, providing unparalleled hearing quality, wearing comfort, and automation that simplifies your life. Don't be fooled by our imitators. There's only one Advanced Audiology with the purple sign, next to AAA on Valencia Boulevard.
KHTS, your hometown station.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sharon Brubaker, Advanced Certified Grief Recovery Specialist, and you are right here on KHTS, your hometown station, and you are listening to the Grief Recovery Hour. Welcome back, friends. We're so glad you've been joining us for this amazing hour. My amazing guest today is Sharon Ellers, and she is Advanced Grief Recovery Specialist as well, and she's also a Reiki master teacher, which I have just been having so much fun learning about Reiki. I kind of want to change this up a little bit, but we have a serious subject we need to talk about, and before we segue into our next subject, which is suicide, I want to give out a couple times, if I can, today the National Prevention Suicide phone number. Their hotline phone number is 1-800-273-8255. I'm also going to post that in the notes today, and we'll try and give it out just one more time before the end of the show. Sharon, can you share with us your experience about suicide, as little or as much as you'd like to share with us?
Sure. My best friend Joy, who we were best friends forever, unfortunately had a life of struggle. She had attempted suicide multiple times, and finally, about 8 years ago, she was successful, if you can call it successful, but you know what I'm saying. And that just devastated me. I was one of the last people besides her husband to have spoken with her, and so when I got the call that evening that she had died, I was just beyond devastated. I couldn't even fathom what happened. I got in my car. They lived in Vegas, and I got in my car, I think, the next day and just drove until I got to her house. And I remember sitting in her closet because it smelled, I would cry, because it smelled like her, and just, trying to understand what happened. And I think that's one of the things about suicide that makes it so difficult is you don't understand, right? After she died, as I said previously, I had sort of figured I could fix it myself. And so my grief, even though it was overwhelming, I felt like I was in control and that I was going to get better and that I was going to, do all the things you're not supposed to do. But within the 2-year span, my former fiance, John, also died by suicide. And the day I got the call, he was a former Ventura County sheriff, and we had both worked in the federal government together. So it was really a surprise because as a sheriff, he had answered so many suicide calls, and it was just so not him to even consider that. And so it was very confusing. But I also knew, and this was one of the reasons we weren't together anymore, was that he was in a lot of pain. Physical pain, emotional pain. And so when I got the phone call, part of me wasn't surprised, but I was devastated. It's hard to fathom. I mean, his daughter was about to graduate from college. I mean, there's like timing. You really don't know what's going on in somebody's head, right?
Right.
You just know what happens and what the result is. And so within that short period of time, I had lost two people who mattered more to me than anybody. John and I had been together for a long time. We had a house together. We still had a house together after he died, even though we weren't physically a couple anymore. I always thought of him as my soulmate. So I felt like my whole world had just crumbled and somebody had gone in, not just ripped out my heart, but they took my soul with it too. And then they brought their truck and they kept driving over it back and forth and back and forth. So, and I think what I did was I just started to try to read about suicide, and I think one of the difficulties being Catholic and being raised Catholic, I didn't understand, I'd been sort of pre-programmed that you die by suicide and you're going to hell, or you're in limbo, or you're somewhere walking the earth and lost. And I'm like, all these thoughts just kept going through my head. So it was very scary. It was a very scary time. And I really didn't have the right information at the time to be able to process what it meant, what to do as a result for myself, how to talk to people about it. I felt very isolated and alone. I mean, people said, we hear, they wouldn't even say his name. We heard, he died. It's like, yes, John died, They wouldn't talk about how he died. And, the specifics of it are irrelevant, but the fact that he was dead, I think, was important. And the fact that it was suicide, I think, was also important. And I learned in the beginning that, people they don't want to talk about death. They certainly don't want to talk about grief, but you add suicide in there and, just like many of the other topics, murder or whatever, and people just kind of, they scatter to the four winds. And so I felt very lost and alone and isolated in my grief.
It's really sad where we are as a community, and you're saying like people want to know the specifics about it, and that doesn't really matter. It's like they almost miss the entire point that this soul was hurting. This soul was broken. And so quite often I hear people say, oh my gosh, did he leave a note? And how did it happen? They get more wrapped up into that than the actual specifics of the broken heart. Mm-hmm. And we narrow in on the broken heart and the family around it. Right. They're all grieving now. One of the things that I've been trying to get across, and I talk about as often as I can with suicide, is that it's very hurtful for family members to hear the words committed suicide. Right. They really don't want to. And so I want to share that today, that the political and correct way is to say death by suicide, right, because it's not like they've committed a crime. Right. And that's part of the stigma of why people don't want to talk about suicide, is because of the mental health issues sometimes that go along with it. And we know for a fact, as grief recovery specialists, that mental illness may not always play a part in it, right? And so it's a risk. It's one of the risk factors, but not always. And that's because of the stigma. Do you find that a lot of people don't want to say, "My loved one died by suicide"? They don't want to share that because they feel they're going to be shunned. That's something that came way back. We've had in our history for years.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think not only culturally, but also religiously, we treat it with such, stigma that you certainly wouldn't tell anybody who might condemn you for knowing somebody who had died by suicide. And so I think just all the way around, it makes it very difficult for people who are grievers of someone who died by suicide to know where to go to find a safe place to talk about it. And for me, I found a wonderful place in Culver City called the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services, but they do a lot of suicide prevention discussions, and they have support groups for those who have lost someone to suicide. And that was the first time being in that group. I didn't go after Joy died. I looked into it, but I didn't go. But after John died, I was like on the front door, asking to be put into a group, and basically being in an environment with people talking about it was so healing, because I never felt like I could say anything to anybody. They either didn't want to know, or they just looked at you cross-eyed like, please, please, please don't say those words, So
as long as we put our head in the sand, it's still not going to go away.
No.
It's not going to go away. We have to know that this is a part of living, and that people are hurting and they need to talk. In grief recovery, we teach to be a listener. To imagine a big giant heart with two big giant ears just hanging off the end of it, and let the griever talk, because most times they need to blow off steam. Would you say that that's great advice for someone that is just really having a hard time, or giving the signs out? Tell me, what's your best advice for someone that maybe throwing out some signs? I'm hurting here. I'm hurting.
Well, I think the most important thing is to have an honest conversation about it, because we tend to dance around it and say things like, well, are you feeling okay? And it's like, you have to ask the question, are you thinking about killing yourself?
Yes.
And we don't want to say those words, right? Because then it makes it real. And it's like, I think when we open that door, that person is going to have an honest conversation, hopefully, with us back. And then at that point, we do listen. We do become a heart with ears, without judging or analyzing or criticizing or saying, just think positive thoughts and you'll be better. Or, God wouldn't want you to do that, or whatever it is. It's like, without saying those words, but being honest and just listening and being there for them. I think that's the most important thing. But it has to be an honest conversation, and you have to ask, are you thinking about, because if they have a plan and they've already thought that through, then you need to go to the next step, and that's finding professional help.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, and I was sharing with Sharon earlier today, that even as a grief recovery specialist, it is so easy, especially when it's our family and our close family, to fall back into trying to fix it. Mm-hmm. Your kids come to you, your kids' friends come to you, and they're having a bad day, and then you start giving the advice. And that's where, being the heart with ears, you can really just listen and ask questions. And I agree with you, having the honest conversation is great. Knowing that you're having this honest conversation, and that they have a safe place to talk to you, and you're not going to run around and tell everybody what was said or scream it from the rooftop, is so important, right? Let me ask you a question. Were there ever any warning signs for you, and that with either Joy or John, that just things that were said and that you handled them a certain way? Could you share that, and how we can enlighten people with that?
Well, Joy had a struggle with life her whole life. And so for me, I was on the receiving end of many phone calls where she had done something to herself, taken pills. And again, this was many, many years before she actually died. And so at the time, I didn't know what to do. I remember leaving work, and going over there. I mean, I don't think we talked about it back then, but if somebody is in that situation and they do get a phone call, and you're on the receiving end, you may have to call 911. You may have to call somebody to go over there. I was in Virginia living, and Joy was here in California, and she called me, and it wasn't like I could get there, get in my car and drive over. So I had to call somebody to go check on her. And I think that's important to know, that if you think somebody has done something, you either have to get to them, or you have to call in help that can deal with the situation depending on what's going on.
With many suicide attempts and successful suicides, would you agree that a lot of it is just the grief within their own heart? Aside from the mental illness, sometimes it's just not being able to figure that out. And as you're dealing with more and more people that come across that conversation,
maybe because I'm in the grief work, the people who talk to me are grieving.
Right.
But it seems to be a prevalent, because there are so many loss in life events that cause the feelings of grief. I think when we look at it, it could be, you've lost your job. It could be for joy. She was living in Southern California. This is where she grew up. This is where her family was. But her husband retired and they moved to Las Vegas. And Las Vegas was not the best place for her because she liked to gamble. And so there was a grief in leaving her family behind. There was a grief in, so many, she had to change jobs. I think that grief can be, and sadness, an underlying reason on top of other things. And I strongly believe that. I really do. I think because we aren't taught how to deal with it, we just kind of push it down as far as it can go, and then it sort of rises its ugly head in different ways.
What about the family that's left after a successful attempt? What advice would you like to give to the family members that are here that are dealing with it right now?
Well, I think it's important not to focus on how they died.
Yeah.
I think it's important to talk about suicide. I think it's important to acknowledge it. But I think it's also important to remember the person who lived and not remembering that and only making suicide, Joy and John were beautiful people. Their lives were beautiful and they did so many things to touch others. Their death at a moment of pain is not something that defines them in my eyes. And so it took me a while to stop focusing on how they died and start remembering on how they lived.
Right. And this is thank you for sharing that. That's so sweet. I want to acknowledge that. You're just an amazing story. This is also a great moment to talk to our children. Talk to our children about these fleeting thoughts and serious thoughts and thoughts that continue to happen time and time again, and what suicide really is, what people say about it, what death by suicide really is, and what advice would you give to any parent that needed to talk to their children? And is this a good time to start the conversation?
I think it's never as good a time as right now, right Sharon? And
yeah.
I think it's so important. I think, first of all, we learn in grief recovery that, we learn how to deal with how to acquire things, but we don't know how to deal with loss. I think it's very important to talk to kids about loss. And, you don't always have to be on the number one baseball team. And, there are days where you're going to lose, and there's days where things aren't going to be very great. There's also programs out there specifically on how to talk to kids and teens. I know I made sure that I watched, 13 Reasons Why. I liked the show. That may be controversial, but I believe that they show it in an open and honest viewpoint, sitting down with your kids, first watching it yourself and then sitting down and watching it with your kids, having that conversation, I think is also very important.
Absolutely. It's so important to get to that point and share with our kids. And again, the honesty is important at that point, is to really being honest. How would you have a conversation with your kids if it's in your family?
Well, first, I don't think I would hide the fact, and in my family, I've found out things, I'm later in life, and I'm like, Uncle so-and-so did what? It's kind of like, well, we never talked about that before. When Joy and John died, I was very honest with my children. Right. My kids were teenagers when Joy died. My two youngest were in high school. My oldest is about 10, 12 years older. But we all sat down. We had our own memorial service. We talked about it. We talked about the difficulties. I think being open and honest. I talked about how I was feeling. I talked about, I asked them how they were feeling. I think having those kind of conversations are a lot different than maybe when I grew up, where if something happened, no one said anything, and you're kind of like, well, what happened? And then you sort of find out, 50 years later that this is the activity, or this is what was going on in the family. So I think sitting down and being open first with yourself, which we're taught in grief recovery, and then being honest and having those conversations with children are so important. It's age appropriate. You have to think about the ages, but I know for me, talking to my kids, especially the ones that were in high school at the time, that was definitely important. And then it was twice. So it was 2 important conversations to have.
I understand that one of the struggles with the grieving family that as they're going through their daily walk is really that answer to that one question, why? And we don't always get that answer, do we?
No, we don't.
How can we help those people that are really thinking about that, our friends out there?
I spent a lot of years thinking about the whys, and I realized I wasn't in either John or Joy's heads when they made those decisions, and so we will never know why. No. It was their choice. The pain that they were going through was far beyond anything that they felt that they could handle, and they wanted the pain to go away. So if you get too caught up in the why, you really don't heal. And I think I had to let go of trying to understand why. I had to let go of that, and I had to figure out, okay, so how am I going to recover from this? How am I going to move forward? I can spend the rest of my life wondering why, but I'll never know the answer because I wasn't in their heads at the time. And we can only guess. We can really only guess. So I think it's less important to focus on the why and more important to focus on them and your own healing in order to move forward.
That's such great advice, because that literally figuring out the why, we can become detectives over that.
Right.
And tracing back their every step and going to where they went, doing what they did, talking to all their friends, and really trying to find that out. And it slows down our process of actually grieving and moving forward and lifting them up in the way that they may deserve or that they need to live in our hearts, right? So we absolutely can go to that. You are a co-author of an amazing book on grief. Can you share a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, this was one of the things that helped me to heal. The Grief Diaries series is a series of about 30 books now, I think, that are out there on different topics relating to grief. The one book that I helped to co-author is called Surviving Loss by Suicide, and it's 12 to 14 stories of people who have gone through suicide loss in their own lives. And I found in writing, I wrote this after John died, it gave me an opportunity to heal. And so it talks a lot about how'd you feel, your first Christmas, what are anniversaries like for you? So it's a very great compilation of stories of people who've actually gone through suicide with somebody they loved.
That's beautiful. Tell us the title one more time.
It's called Grief Diaries: Surviving Loss by Suicide.
Perfect. Again, National Suicide Prevention phone number 1-800-273-8255. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll see you right back here after the break.
Come join me, Arif Halby, for Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour. Every Tuesday at noon, we uncover ways to help you manage your money, get out of debt, and prepare for your retirement. That's every Tuesday at noon on Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour. Are you not sure if you can retire yet? Listen to us and learn about tips for savings, retirement strategies, and so much more. That's every Tuesday at noon on Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour on your hometown station, KHTS.
All-Star Sports Grills is the best place in town to catch a Dodger game on one of their 17 screens and choose a cold one from 23 different tap beers. All-Star Sports Grills prides itself on their fresh, made-to-order menu, including half-pound Angus burgers. Enjoy an all-star comedy show the fourth Wednesday of the month. All-Star Sports has a pet-friendly and smoking patio. All-Star Sports Grills on Bouquet Canyon, north of Plum Canyon.
There's a very good reason Gilbertson and LeCornu have been voted Santa Clarita's #1 orthodontist for 8 years in a row.
There's a lot of orthodontists in our community and a lot of really great doctors.
Dr. Megan LeCornu.
Artistically, I like nice big smiles. Those are the smiles that wow people. So in all my treatment planning, I don't do a one-size-fits-all. I look at the patient's facial structure and I match their smile to their facial structure.
Dr. Megan LeCornu of Gilbertson and LeCornu.
Embrace your smile.
EmbraceYourSmile.com.
Hey there, I'm Tori with your hometown station. Weather, sunny skies this week, but hot with temperatures in the low to mid 90s, overnight lows in the mid 60s. Don't miss out. Get your tickets to Diamond Rio at the Santa Clarita Performing Arts Center, College of the Canyons, Saturday, June 30th at 7 p.m. with special guest Savannah Burrows. Tickets are on sale now. Visit canyonspac.com. That's canyonspac.com.
Hometown, your hometown station.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sharon Brubaker, Certified Grief Recovery Specialist. Actually, Advanced Certified Grief Recovery Specialist. I got to add that in. You are listening to KHTS, your hometown station, and this is the Grief Recovery Hour. And my guest, Sharon Ellers, is here. She's also Advanced Grief Recovery Specialist and Reiki Master Teacher, which is amazing. We've been having a great time talking about our favorite subject, which is grief. And we just ended our segue on suicide, and we're going to go right into Father's Day is coming up. And it's going to be a tough day for a lot of people on both sides. And when I say on both sides, you and I both lost our father. But we have many clients that have lost children. Right. And so they're going to wake up on Sunday morning and those memories are going to be there. So I'll share a little bit about what I did on the first year without my dad. That was so helpful. It didn't really affect me as much on Father's Day, but it did on Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was his favorite holiday, and my father has passed away on Thanksgiving. In the middle of the night on Thanksgiving. Wow. So that first year, I knew that it was going to be tough, so I invited a lot of friends over. This was after I'd done my grief work, and I invited a lot of friends over. I secretly planned a Nerf war just for fun. But in that morning when I got up, I wrote him a letter. And I just told him the things that I was doing for Thanksgiving that day because he loved cooking and he would prepare for it. Mm-hmm. And so it made my heart feel, okay. It didn't fix it, but I at least felt like I was communicating with him. And I actually typed the letter into my phone. And as my brothers and sisters were calling me, I really encouraged them to do the same thing. And I just sent them my letter. And it was really helpful for all of us. It was really kind of cool, that experience. Share with me what it was like for you, that first realization. This is going to be your second.
My second, yeah. Mm-hmm. Last year was the first, and it was kind of like this big looming beacon in the, in the future. Like, oh my gosh, you walk into a store and all the Father's Day stuff is up, and sort of subconsciously, you're dreading it, even though it brings positive. That's that conflicting feelings of grief, right? There's those positive feelings, and there's also those negative feelings. So my dad was a big personality, and my dad, he wrote poems for all of our holidays. And so what I did last year is, with him not being there, is I wrote a poem for him that it was just my mom and my sister and I believe. And we went out and we went to a brewery because my dad liked beer. Even though we didn't have a beer, we just sat in a brewery just because it made us feel like we were closer to him. And I read the poem that I had written on behalf of my dad, who wasn't there to write one. He usually write one for himself. And then what my mom did is she gave my sister and I both watches, one of which I'm wearing today, my dad's watches. So my sister got a watch for my dad and I got a watch. And I think it just, we cried and we ate and watched sports, which is what he would have loved to do. And I think just those memories, being able to share, again, those conflicting feelings of the happiness of thinking back to all of the Father's Days were so wonderful, but also the sad feelings that he wasn't going to be with us. So I think that was very healing as well. So similar story to kind of what you went through.
So what we are both sharing here, my friends, is that we both went into the holiday with a plan. Mm-hmm. We both knew what we were going to do. It is not about keeping busy that day, because you cannot do enough to get away from probably missing them or the pain that's going to be in your heart, right? So you and I both had a plan for that day, and we went, I love that you wrote a poem. I think that's so beautiful. So we had the plan and we executed the plan. Share a little bit about, that doesn't mean that you didn't wake up and cry. It doesn't mean that your heart wasn't broken. It doesn't mean that you didn't miss them, but these things made you feel closer to him. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think so. I think it's just, I think everybody's different, but I think if you go into it not having a plan, you can feel overwhelmed. And so, your plan might be not to do anything that day. Your plan might be just to stay in bed and cry. I mean, it just depends on where you're at on your journey. And for me, having a plan and being able to say to my mom, who was also grieving the loss of her husband of 65 years, this is what we're going to do. And all of us being on the same page made such a big difference. We were able to grieve together. And I think grieving in community is often very healing as well. So whatever your plan is, even if it is to do nothing, it doesn't mean that you still won't have those conflicting feelings of sadness and happiness, in memory and thinking of the good memories that you went through with them.
And I think also, Sharon, that you'll agree with me that talking also will help. Talking to other family members and honest conversation. That's what we're talking about, an honest conversation. Yeah. My heart is broken. I'm absolutely missing him. Friends, one of the things that my dad loved was to bake a turkey, and we're from Louisiana, and so we fry turkey, and so all of us kids every year we're like, no, Dad, just fry the turkey. We want to fry turkey. So he baked a turkey every year, and that first year I got up and I baked a turkey, and that was part of what was in my note, and that was part of my plan as well. And the just executing that plan and letting him know, hey, I've got the turkey baking. Whatever it's going to be for you, that's personal to you, guys, just execute that. Sunday is going to be tough for a lot of us. Yes. Know that there are many grief recovery specialists, and we're here holding your space. We're sending you good energy. What other advice would you like to leave?
I think just reaching out. I think we tend to not reach out for help because we feel that we might be weak to do that. And I think it's so important to know that reaching out actually helps you to grow and to heal. And so, if you feel like you're not in a good space, calling, reaching out, watching something on one of your previous shows that talks about grief can really make a difference on that day if you're not feeling in a good space.
And how can guests find you? I'm going to put those notes in the Facebook page, and she is Grief Reiki on Facebook and griefreiki.com. I'm going to put your connection notes. Thank you, friends, for joining us here for this hour.